with you on this beautiful, almost winter-like day. Anybody like cold weather? All right, we got a few in the crowd. I'm from Pennsylvania, so I enjoy it when it gets a little cooler. Well, today, my project focus is on language. And so I decided to present a speech today called The Power of a Book. And I brought a book with me. And this book is the complete poems of Emily Dickinson, who happens to be my favorite poet. And it was given to me to commemorate my anniversary of my birth in 2008 from my wife. So, I will be referring to this a little bit today during my speech. But I have a question for you today. Have you ever considered that paper and ink are powerful ingredients? You know, the English novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton, whose name is not very familiar to most of us, however, he wrote something very familiar, and that is that the pen is mightier than the sword. And you know, Emily Dickinson wrote about one of her poems about the book, and I would like to recite that for you. It goes like this: "There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. For this traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul." You can see that Emily Dickinson had some special insight about books. And you know, books are history's chariot. They have certainly emerged, in my opinion, as the all-time, all-powerful influence on humanity. From earliest history, words were scripted and gathered and etched onto scrolls or delicate rice paper. And it's the words that are really the secret behind every influential book. But you know, it wasn't until about 1450 AD that, as legend has it, like a flash of light, the idea for the printing press came to a man named Johannes Gutenberg from Mainz, Germany. And you know, it seemed that after Gutenberg invented his masterpiece, that the age of enlightenment took off. And if you study history, you will see that people began to write. The great philosophers began to write. John Locke and Isaac Newton and Voltaire and many others. And their influence spread across Europe and then the Americas. And that influenced our founding fathers, who began to fight, like William Penn, and like Ben Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine, who wrote a very little book called Common Sense just a few months before our War of Independence was sparked in 1776. Another book that I thought about being so influential was written when our country was in the throes of the institution of slavery. And there was a little school teacher named Harriet Beecher Stowe who wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin that described the evil of slavery. And it's recorded that when Abraham Lincoln met this little teacher, he said to her, "Are you the little lady that started this great big war with that little book?" Another book that many of us are familiar with was written around the same time by a man named Charles Darwin, called The Origin of Species. Darwin was a British scientist, and he worked on his book for 20 years. And his theory of evolution challenged the religious establishment in the world and is well known to do that same thing today. You know, an argument could be made that the literary power of a book can literally change the world. But I want to tell you today, with the few minutes I have remaining, my favorite book is the all-time bestseller, one that has been sold for more than $6 billion since it was the first book ever printed in the world, and that book is the Holy Bible. You know, the Bible is a book of books. There are 66 books contained in the Bible, and it was written by prophets, priests, shepherds, fishermen over centuries. And of course, it had divine help in that process. But who can forget the inspired words of the Bible? Moses, 3,500 years ago, writing, "In the beginning, God." And David, the shepherd king, we all remember his words at funerals when he said in the Psalms, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And then 2,000 years ago, St. John wrote those words that we know so well, "For God so loved the world." And now we see it on athletes' eyelids and on billboards everywhere. Centuries have passed, but words still flow. They're like streams of water coming up from the deep aquifers of Florida. And words are weapons. They're wielded by fierce warriors of rhetoric, some good and some evil. And when words are bound and inspired, they find their way onto the printed page or on the digital display, and they reach the human heart and mind and reveal the power of a book. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.